If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. What's the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? Caregiving. Knock shift. Got a complaint around 3 a.m. about screaming and banging. Cool. Someone with Alzheimer's is sundowning. Let me redirect them. I get on the elevator to the 4th floor. As I approach the floor, I hear this wailing and shrieking. Like a banshee or a witch. And she is just slamming her walker on everything. I get out. Immediately confronted her. Gently suggested, let's go back to your room. Have some water. Maybe use the toilet. She is still howling up a storm. Like just uncontrollable shrill screaming. Halfway down the hall she immediately goes silent. She slowly picks up her hand and points a bony trembling finger in my direction. He is right behind you, immediately go into fuck this mode. I get the creepy crawlies all up and down my spine. I pick up the pace. Take her back to her room. Get her into bed. Immediately nope out. I work as a dog walker. We had a client who was an extremely rich and well-known coin collector that lived alone with his dog and had a bit of an alcohol problem. Really nice guy, just smelled like booze and was very disheveled every morning when we'd pick his dog up to walk her. One Monday morning I walk into his huge house and it looks like he's asleep on the couch as he normally is, so I called his name to wake him up. I realized he's half on his couch and in a really weird position. He wasn't waking up, so eventually I walk over to him and his eyes are wide open, blood coming out of his nose and mouth, and his hands are turning black and blue. Threw up on his patio and called 911. They said he'd been dead since Friday. He lived there alone and didn't have friends or family nearby, so I was the one that found him. Really sad, as he was very nice and not very old. But yes, still have nightmares of that wide open mouth and eyes with blood covering his face. I never really got the confirmation, but paramedics at the scene said it was probably from a fall that happened while he was drunk. My family owned a cabin in the woods of Virginia. My mother and sister were convinced it was haunted, and I didn't believe it. They said they would lock the front and rear door and wake up in the morning and the door would not only be unlocked but sitting open. They thought I was pranking them, which I wasn't. Then they thought a neighbor was pranking them. So during the winter I decided to go stay at the cabin, and it was supposed to snow, and I thought that would be cool to be in the country during a nice snow. I arrived and it was very cold at 13°F. I lit a fire in the wood stove and stoked it to it really going. The place was slowly warming up, so I prepared for bed. It was lightly snowing outside, so I locked the doors, double-checked that they were locked, and went to bed with 2 quilts. I woke up and the cabin was very cold, so I walked into the main room and the door was sitting wide open and snow was blowing in, and I turned to my right and there was a 7-foot-tall insect-like creature, hard exoskeleton, with knees that bent in the opposite direction as humans. I jolted awake and it was a dream. I was like, holy fuck. My heart was pounding. It was an incredibly vivid dream. As I'm sitting up in bed, I realize it's very cold, so I thought the wood stove needed wood, and I walked out of the bedroom and the fucking door was sitting wide open and snow was blowing in. This was exactly like the dream. I fucking looked to my right and could only see darkness, so like a totally insane man I flailed against the wall looking for the light switch and turned it on. There was nothing there. I walked to the door to close it and I was shaking wildly. I looked at the snow and there were no footprints, so someone hadn't opened the door from the outside. I never stayed in that cabin again. What's weird is the door never opened when people weren't there. So when people arrived to use it, it was always securely locked. I've thought about what could cause it, and it's not heat expansion, as the cabin was mostly used during the spring and summer, so no heat, but the door would open at night. A former friend and I went into the tunnels of a wash to smoke while waiting for our other friends. We decided to walk through it for a little just to see what we would find. At about 15-ish minutes in, we're approaching another bend, and see something in the distance sitting against the wall. We stop and kinda just stare for a bit, thinking it might be a homeless man or something. Whatever it was, it immediately knew we were there. Then we see it lean forward onto its feet, and very slowly stand without taking its eyes off of us. It was super skinny, and looked completely gray. Couldn't make out any defining physical or facial features. It just looked like a tall, skinny, naked gray man. I definitely didn't like what I saw, and I could tell it surely wasn't welcoming of our presence. It's safe to say we both got the fuck out of there pretty quickly. I don't know who or what it was, but I didn't like it. A few years ago I was woken up by someone lightly poking me in the forehead at 5 a.m. I woke up thinking it was my roommate, but when my eyes started to adapt to the darkness I saw a 2 meters man standing next to my bed. He immediately threw himself to the floor and covered his face. I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't even scream as I was completely shocked. While I was thinking of what to use as a weapon, he got up and started running out of the apartment, And for some reason I jumped out right behind him, don't know why I did tbh, and only then I started screaming for help. He eventually made it out of the apartment and started going down the stairs. I gained some sense and realized I probably shouldn't be following this huge, tall, unknown man and ran back to my apartment. One of my roommates was ready to go follow him, bat in hand and all, but we decided it'd be better to just call the police. We never found out who he was or why he was there, and nothing was stolen or taken. Took me a long time to make it through the night calmly again, and even more to feel comfortable at that apartment, especially by myself. Couple of years ago I had a dream I was in an elevator, and could only press up. One woman and one man were in the back of the elevator. As we ascended, the elevator began shuddering and rattling. It paused, then I heard something snap. Then it was just the sensation of falling. The next day, I was in a dilapidated multi-story parking lot in an unknown part of town. I think my boyfriend and I were going to see a play, and it was the only parking lot with empty spots left. We got into an old, rusted elevator to go down. One woman and one man were already there. As we descended, the tiny elevator shuddered and then slowly stopped and started several times. We were all looking at each other, uncertain. I couldn't take it anymore. I pressed the button for the next floor. I made my boyfriend take the stairs for the next 5 floors. He was furious. Didn't see the woman and man again that night. This happened a few months ago. I was driving down my street coming home after a night out. As soon as I approached my house, I noticed a guy in a suit just standing across the street in the field looking at my house. I didn't want to pull into my house at that point, so I just drove around my neighborhood. 10 minutes or so go by and I drive by again. He's still there and he hasn't moved. At that point I just drove around again, 5 more minutes, and he's still just standing there, staring at my house. At that point I just pulled into my driveway to see what he does. Absolutely nothing. He didn't even flinch. Couple hours later he vanished. No idea who TF he was, but it still creeps me out. This is only creepy in hindsight. My, now ex-husband and I were living in a building with 9 efficiency apartments. We were the middle apartment on the 3rd floor. One day the neighbor that lived directly underneath us knocked on our door. He came in and started apologizing for being short with us several days before. Honestly, he had no need to apologize. He was not rude or anything. We got home at the same time he did, and he politely told us he didn't have time to talk. We told him it was fine and then chatted for a few more minutes. He told us how we were really nice neighbors, and we joked about the time our cat got out and wandered into his apartment, probably thinking it was our apartment. Before he left he said, "Hey listen, I'm going to be working on a project, so if you hear banging and loud noises, don't get alarmed. When I'm finished with that I'm going on vacation, so you won't see me for a while." We told him that was fine and didn't think much of it. About a week later he was found dead in his apartment. The project he was working on was a scaffold to hang himself. Before he hung himself he paid his rent in advance, left his door unlocked, and turned his heat up to 90 degrees. He had an ex-wife that he was feuding with, so we think that he wanted her to be the only one who would come looking for him and find him as a disgusting, decomposed mess. Unfortunately he didn't account for the smell. We started smelling something putrid early one morning, so I called the rental office and had them investigate. I told them it was probably a sewer leak. The poor maintenance man walked in on the mess. So basically the dude came up to say goodbye to us and to make sure we weren't on bad terms with him before he died. I wish we would have seen a warning sign or something so that maybe we could have gotten him some help, but we weren't close with him and there was really no way for us to have known. My grandparents lived in this huge house when I was a teenager, 2 levels and a basement. We converted the basement into an office so my grandfather could run his business out of it. It was a large L-shaped space with a stairway at both ends, one that led up to the main house and another that led to the furnace room in the garage. I was 14 and my parents were going through a nasty divorce. I chose to stay with my grandparents rather than move between both parents' homes. At night I would hang out downstairs and do my homework on Grandpa's computer or use it to write short stories. I'd gotten fairly absorbed into my latest work and didn't realize how late it was, but when I looked at the clock it was 3 a.m. and I had school the next morning. I tried to print my paper but the printer ran out of paper, so I went to get more and stopped dead. I looked down to the end of the room with the stairs that lead to the garage. A man was standing there watching me. He was completely out of place. He had a suit on with a fancy top hat, a long worn face and beard. I didn't know what to do, so I just stood there and stared back at him for a second, then watched as he turned and walked straight into my mother's office door and disappeared. I completely forgot what I was doing and ran up to the main level, then the 2nd floor to my bedroom. The next day my grandmother told me she had been seeing different people in the house since they moved in. She's Native American and had been seeing spirits all her life while growing up on the reservation. She thinks they were probably from the city graveyard that was about half a block from the house. I was a cop in a very remote location in northern Australia. Late at night I received a call about a body found in a bush cemetery. Bush cemeteries are these tiny, old cemeteries that are normally out in the middle of nowhere. The cemetery had a handful of plots, some from early 1900s, and was dotted with termite mounds. The matter was of interest as the body was in a shallow, unmarked grave, and wrapped in a canvas bag. The detectives are all based in the city some 450 km away. It was decided that they would come down the next morning. This meant that a crime scene guard must be posted at the location in the interim. I volunteered as crime scene guard. I grabbed my fold-out camp chair and settled down for the night to chill with old mate. It was a pretty nice night, so I just spent the time looking up at the stars. It was just me, the body, and the Milky Way. A couple of hours pass uneventfully. At about 2 a.m. the quiet tranquility was pierced by blood-curdling screams. The screams were coming from the bushland some 10 to 15 meters behind me. It sounded like someone was being brutally murdered. I hit the deck, then started creeping forward on my belly, hand on my holster. I call out multiple times, but there was no reply. Oddly enough, the screams would rise and fall, and were getting closer. I wasn't sure if the rank smell was me shitting myself or the decomposing body next to me. I start dragging myself towards the screams. As I get closer, it almost sounds like there are two sources of screams. One is off to my right, and another is fast moving to my left. I take cover when I get to the tree line and wait. I'm staring at the course when a red fox darts out of the trees and tears towards the body. The little fox starts screaming like this, and it is soon joined by its demon spawn. I charge at the bastards to scare them away. They retreat to the bush again, but I heard the buggers screaming all night long. When I was barely 19, I got a second job as a bartender in a dive bar. Everyone, including my boss, knew I was underage, but I was still encouraged to drink. One night, being too young and drunk to know better, I accepted a ride home from a coworker. I was giving him directions to my house, turn left here, straight at the light, etc., but he started ignoring me and turning right when I said left, then left when I said go straight, and I got scared. Luckily, I carried a knife with me at the time. He insisted that he was taking me somewhere nice. I pulled out my knife and held it to his throat until he stopped the car. I got out and ran home. Quit that place right after. This happened about 10 years ago when I was in college. I had a friend who had an issue. Basically, he stated a demon was possessing him. Even had some preachers drive in from out of state to pray over him. I was asked not to be there since there was a possibility of the demon going from one host to another that is weak in their faith. Whatever, I didn't feel qualified to be there nor had any knowledge that would be helpful, so I wasn't. I was mainly there for guidance and to be a friend to the guy, didn't really go out of my way for any first-hand experience. Anyways, the creepy part. About time after all this went down, I had an experience that would forever stick with me. I was in my dorm room in the top bunk. I had a dorm room to myself. It was nighttime, and I was facing away from the dorm door. I looked over, probably to see the time or whatever, and I saw a cloaked figure just standing in my room, right next to the closed door. It wasn't a tall figure, but it wasn't short. I couldn't see any details on them, but I could definitely see the silhouette of someone or something in my room. I glanced at the figure and turned away to lay back down, only to realize that I saw someone in the room and quickly snapped my head to look back at the door. Only to see no one there. Within 5 seconds, I saw a silhouette, looked away, quickly looked back to see no one was there. I know that sometimes in the dark your eyes play tricks on you. The silhouettes of different things in the dark can make it appear like someone or something is there when there isn't. That night in college, their only thing in the room on that wall was a desk. There was nothing there to form a human-like cloaked figure in my room. Something was there then wasn't. Thinking about it still makes my hair stand on end. I was driving at night, crossing a bridge over a familiar freeway that I was about to use. Some distance ahead of me I see a number of bright lights over an area I know to be swamp and fields. It looked like one central very bright light, surrounded by 4 smaller, dimmer lights. It was odd, as there wasn't anything really in that area, no houses or businesses. My sister was in the passenger seat, and I remember saying maybe there was a carnival or something set up in one of the fields, and that it was the Ferris wheel or something. It didn't really make sense as these lights were too far apart, seemed to cover a huge area, but that was all I could think of. I turned onto the loop that leads to the freeway, the whole time glancing, or staring at the lights. At the bottom of the loop I passed under the bridge I was just on, obscuring our view of the lights for maybe 5 seconds. When we came out, the lights were gone. Like a switch. The next day I went over the bridge in the daylight, to see if I could see the carnival, or something, anything to explain it, but there was nothing. I still have no idea what it was. Kind of creeps me out describing it. I'm 19 years old, summer after freshman year of college. I get a ride and hang out with 2 friends. Not gonna lie, we smoked a lot of pot. They are giving me a ride home at maybe 1 a.m. We decide to take the country roads, so a 15-minute ride on the highway takes about an hour in the country. On the drive, one friend starts talking about how weird it would be if someone ran out into the road covered in blood and asked us for help. What if they were a murderer or a zombie or something? As I mentioned, lots of pot. We go around a curve and a tree has fallen across the road. Luckily for us, someone had smashed through the tree on our side of the road already, so we didn't wreck. We see a car about 50 yards up the road run off on the left side and stuck between a tree and a fence. We stop to see if they need our help and it gets weird. We are in the middle of nowhere and there is no one in sight. There's blood on the steering wheel but no one anywhere. We are thoroughly freaked out at this point, what with the earlier zombie/madman conversation, and, stone, don't remember what road we're on or what the closest intersection is. We drive to the next crossroad and call 911, and wait there for the officers so we can show them where the wreck is. There is a huge police response once the officers see the truck, the blood, and no one around. They must have gotten 10 to 15 cars out to start searching. We told several officers what we saw and waited in our truck, scared out of our minds because we were still worried about zombies and also getting arrested for weed. After 3 hours or so, the cops started to leave. Eventually there were only a couple cars left and I got up the nerve to get out of our truck and ask an officer if we could leave. He told me they found the other driver, she had no cell phone, 2002, and walked a few miles to the closest house. Apparently we hadn't been needed for quite some time, but they all forgot about us and we were too high and paranoid to bother the cops. I got home at 5 a.m. and I was still freaked out. I am so glad so many police responded and worked so hard to find that driver. I could picture them lying in a field somewhere dying alone quite easily, and we were all so lucky that night. I never got to thank the officers. I'm sure we looked high as heck, but I imagine they cut us a break for trying to help someone. I once escorted a church group, ages young kids through adults, on a weekend overnight outing to a camp in the Poconos. The camp was set at the confluence of 2 streams and was somewhat rugged. The group had lots to do, a climbing wall, voting, hiking, sports, all kinds of stuff, including a nature center and little museum. The nature center had interactive displays, fish tanks, small animals, etc., and a touch table, a large wooden table with sides, on which was scattered all sorts of artifacts the guests could pick up and handle. These items included deer antlers, bones, turtle shells, feathers, arrowheads and pottery, rocks, seeds and nuts, tanned hides, etc. Little kids especially loved it. All of the items were found by guests or staff while out in the camp, and returned to the nature center. I handled the items also, and I noticed one bone had a really odd shape. I am an environmental scientist by profession, and an outdoorsman and naturalist for fun, and can generally recognize what bones came from what parts of what animals. This bone was a human mandible, the lower jawbone of a person. It was severely worn smooth and had no teeth, but easily recognizable as such. It had been there for years, handled by thousands of people, and no one noticed or at least reported it. Out delivering shopping on Halloween, in Edinburgh, UK. Heard eerie, loud, piercing screams come from the other end of the dark street I was on. 2 little girls exactly alike, dressed as ghouls wearing makeup, came sprinting out of the darkness straight to me, both screaming. They immediately grabbed my jacket and stared up at me shouting something about a woman trying to take them away. Then from behind them out of the dark a bedraggled woman came hobbling along, pale, topless, with extremely saggy breasts and sores all over her arms, and tried to pull the 2 girls away from me stating they were her daughters. I asked the kids where they stayed once I'd gathered my senses and took them home, and phoned the police on this woman, who was covered in sores. She tried to take another child off somebody else so I grabbed her, and as my hand wrapped around her arm, my fingers slipped into one of her large open sores. Luckily somebody nearby let me use their sink to wash my hands. Still had to complete my shift, which was the second most annoying part of this story. When I was in 5th grade, my parents divorced. My dad kept the house I grew up in and my mom moved into a divided house/apartment setup with her soon-to-be new husband. On Halloween night, my mom took me and my siblings trick-or-treating in the small town that the apartment occupied. At the end of the night, my mom took us back to the new apartment to spend the night. The furniture wasn't due to be moved in for a few more days, so we slept in sleeping bags in the living room. I was already on edge because it was a new place still, and the living room had a huge window that faced the sidewalk, so anyone could walk up the porch and look right in. At some point during the night, I had to go to the bathroom. I got up, crossed the room and went to the downstairs bathroom. Before I could go, I swear I heard a voice say, "Hello." I jumped because it sounded like it was coming from the same room as me, right behind my head. It was a high-pitched voice, almost like a little girl, but not quite. Like an adult trying to fake a child's voice, if that makes sense. It sounded happy, like if you were greeting someone you hadn't seen in a while. It didn't sound like either of my sisters or my mom. I just waited in the bathroom for a bit, then eventually calmed down and went back to sleep. A couple of weird things happened while we lived there. Sometimes toys would go missing, there would be weird noises, and my future stepdad even fell down the stairs once after tripping over a hamper that no one can remember putting there, but nothing that logic or reason can't explain. At the end of 6th grade, we moved out of the apartment and into a house outside of town. The last time I was ever there, I was leaving to catch the school bus, but stopped in the bathroom beforehand. As I finished washing my hands, the same exact voice popped up and said, "Goodbye," this time kind of sad sounding. I lived in a particularly popular little town with a particularly popular forest. I won't say what makes it popular, but it rhymes with hair midge. Either way. When I was younger, the town became popular. We used to go into the woods and camp out regularly, and it was really nice. The forest is surprisingly open and the foliage is light, so it's not too hard to orientate yourself using the sky or river that's there. Me and 2 other friends camped there on the regular. About 3 times a month. Except after it became popular, other people began going into the woods and there had begun circling rumors of people out to do bad things. One night while we're camping, we hear a horrible scream. It wasn't human and we knew that for sure. The forest was silent as it was and you could hear everything. Until suddenly there was this very faint sound. Anyone who's ever been hunting knows what it is. It's the sound a knife makes going into flesh with force. We heard it repeatedly with different grunts. We didn't know what to do, but at the time we said, "Fuck this, let's bail." We were kids, the hell are we supposed to do? We didn't even pack. I took the axe I had with me and we just left in the dark, slowly so as to make as little noise as we could. It was the most horrendous experience. Each step the leaves and foliage crackled under our feet in that silence, and each step we would stop and listen. We got far enough that the grunting stopped, but we were terrified of hearing those same crackling sounds our feet made because we sure as fuck didn't want anything following us. We knew where we were going, but I swear we walked for entirely too long. It got to the point where we began to think we had gotten lost because we were in the dark and couldn't see any form of ambient light or anything. We kept going anyhow. It seemed like hours went by and there was no moon out to help. We had to occasionally turn on the light just to see the path and slowly navigate the small trees and terrain. We actually held hands at one point because it felt like any one of us could just disappear and we wouldn't even notice. Eventually we got to my friend's truck at the end of the forest. We go in as fast as we could and lock the doors. We debated WTF just happened and thought about calling the cops. But we were kids and we were afraid of getting into trouble, for what I have no idea. We decided to go to my friend's house for the night and come back in the morning. I never told them this, but I was on the passenger seat, so when my friend turned the headlights on I got a full view of the forest ahead. I swear I saw multiple hands against the far-off trees. Like someone hiding behind them, just barely. My face began to burn and my eyes teared up. I remained silent so my friend wouldn't panic and just leave. We got to his house, no one slept. Next morning we went back. My friend, like us, had a dad who hunted. So we had shotguns each. We went in and followed the same path. Our camp was untouched, nothing missing. We followed the trail to where we assumed we heard a noise. We found a dog a little ways from our camp. No more than maybe a block away. It was torn to absolute pieces, like someone really ripped it apart. There was parts that looked bitten and chewed on before getting spat out. Trees around had blood too, like someone wiping their hands or leaning. Immediately called the cops. They arrived, claimed it was drugged out psychos. Parents banned us from the woods. Never went back. Seriously, fuck those pricks for making the goddamn movie and ruining that forest. It was really nice once. I made the mistake of thinking as long as I walked down Michigan Avenue in Atlantic City from the casinos to my hotel, I would be okay. It's a road that's surrounded by the Tanger outlets. Really nice outlet of shops. Lines the entire road. Also the same road that the AC hospital is on. So I figured it would be safe to walk at night. Big mistake. Had a crackhead shadow me. At one point, he started walking beside me and talking mad shit. He was trying to freak me out and make me an easy target for a mugging or stabbing. Talking about how he gets into fights with other crackheads and big black guys. Did I mention this crackhead was mad racist? I clocked that shit right away. I was creeped out initially, cause I've never been in this situation. And I felt doubly creeped out cause I left my pocket knife at home on this trip. Now, one of my friends is a Marine drill. I mimicked his stride as best I could, hoping my body language would give Cracky McCrackerson up with me and I'll skulf you vibe. Also slowed my pace so if he tried to stab me, I could see it coming and fight back. On the last one sidewalk light between me and the hotel, I decided to begin jogging ahead. Not running in case the crackhead thought the jig was up and I was making a break for it. I noticed that he started picking up his pace at match mine, but keeping a distance so he could try to sneak up on me. It was pure dumb luck that a convention attendee for the event I was attending in AC was taking a smoke break downstairs of the hotel and just happened to round the corner as I noticed the crackhead matching my jog. I yelled out at this guy in a friendly manner, didn't know him, but sure as shit confused the poor guy. Crackhead slows to a slow walk as he realized that he was facing two people instead of just one guy. And he decided to jaywalk to the other sidewalk. To the rando who saved my ass last night, I owe you a beer. To the crackhead I met, let's not meet again. A couple of years ago I'm pretty sure my old housemate and I were nearly murder victims. We and a bunch of friends had gone to beach party that went on all night and just before first light me and my friend decided to walk to the lighthouse. To get to it we had to go up a cliff and walk down a secluded road, nothing along there other than a bricked up old bungalow and an overgrown wasteland. That's when we saw this guy walking out of the bushes and up the opposite way to us. He came up and stated talking to us everything seemed normal for a minute as he explained he had just been at his allotment. We later found out there were no allotments anywhere near, until he kept trying to get us to enter the bricked up bungalow and every time we declined he would become more insistent and his reasons would change. The reasons went from have you seen inside to there's cool artwork inside, a few more mundane reason. Then we clicked something was really off with this guy. That's when it got weirder. His next reasons were I grow pot inside, come in and have some. Then he grabs both mine and my friend's wrist tightly, still seeming civil. We think maybe he is just pissed or odd, dropping this translucent plastic carrier bag to the ground with a hefty thud. As we try to get this man to release his grip, his last reason was there's two dead bodies handcuffed inside. You must see. I'll never forget the look in his eyes as they darted between us as he described the bodies. He was describing us. That when I looked down at his bag I see the only things in it were a large hammer and a ragged cloth. At that moment I knew we had to get it out of there or we were So I yanked my arm back as hard as I could to get him off me and get between him and my friend and tell him we have changed our minds and we must get back to the rest of our friends. He hesitantly lets go of her and questions us about our friends. We walk fast as we can back the way we came, didn't run as we didn't know how unstable he was and didn't want to alert him. He picks up his bag and slowly follows us for a while. We get to the top of the road and can see the still lit distant bonfire. As I look back he's vanished. No one came up that path after us, but also there was nothing down that path. We never saw him again. When I was like 5, really young, before life changed me, I was eating dinner in the basement floor of my house. We had it set up so it was like a cozy living room area, couch, TV, etc. There was a creepy little furnace room which was just a dark spot in our house off to the side of the living room area, as well as a bathroom down the hall with a sauna that didn't work, a bedroom next to that bathroom, and a door to the outside which led to our water tank. This home is located very far out in the country. It's a dirt road for like 30 minutes to the nearest town. As I was eating my dinner, just chillin', watching TV, suddenly one of my action figures flies across the room and crashes into the wall with a loud bang. I watched it fly across the room and hit the wall and fall, and I saw this with my own eyes. Thinking it was my sister, I say, very funny Stephanie. I know it was you. But I did not hear her signature giggle, which I would have expected, nor did I hear her walk back up the creaky wooden stairs. I myself investigated further. I grabbed the action figure from behind the TV and went up the stairs myself and checked on my family upstairs. My sister was in the middle of a puzzle, not out of breath. She hadn't just run up silently and joined in like nothing was happening. She wasn't the one who threw the action figure. My question is, who did? When I was a child, probably about 6 to 7 years old, we were playing hide and seek one night with my older cousins. My front yard was really dark because there isn't much in the way of street lighting and we have a few big trees in the yard. I was in and I thought I could see one of my cousins lying in the shadows beneath one of the trees, and so I called out to him and told him I could see him. I kept walking closer and the person who I thought was my cousin was still lying there watching me. Suddenly some of my other cousins came out of the house calling for me, and the person in the shadows shot up and sprinted down the street and kept running until they turned the corner. I was so confused because I still thought it was my cousin, and I was telling everyone how he'd taken off around the block. Turns out my cousin was in the backyard the entire time. I still have no idea who was watching me while I was alone out there. Something I only saw for a moment, but I sure as hell heard it. So I was at my grandparents' home in south of the East Coast. They live in the country with woods and fields. My grandma and I walk outside to feed her 3 dogs. It is currently around 9 p.m. My grandma can't whistle, so I let out a shrill cattle whistle to call the dogs as we walk inside the little doored shed they have. As soon as we shut the door, we heard a dog barking a ways away, and I just thought, oh, here come the dogs. So I turned back around and scooped some food for them. I walk back outside, pour the food, and while I'm doing so, I hear a low, feline growl. I froze in fear. I stood there for a few seconds, aka eternity, thinking, holy shit, I'm going to get mauled by a fucking mountain lion. I finally snapped to, dropped the food scoop, and basically damned Superman into the shed, landing hard as my grandma slams the door. Then we hear it. The low growls again. On the roof. Me and my grandma stood there, shaking. I fumble in my pockets, searching for my phone. I finally grabbed it, called my grandpa, told him to grab his Mossberg, and look to see if there's a mountain lion and where around us, and if he does see it, shoot towards it to scare it. Then my grandma grabbed my phone and yelled into it. Jimmy, there's a big ass cat on the roof of the shed. Shoot the damn thing. I look out the little window to see my grandpa running out on the porch, shotgun in hand, yelling and aiming the gun at the roof. I heard some scratching from the roof and a thud to my right. I peer out the right window to see a 400-pound cat bouncing into the woods. Pretty scary, I guess. I'm a little late, but this was probably several years ago. In my previous hometown. 2 stories below story 1, anyway, me and a friend loved to explore the surrounding woodlands. It was all surrounded by suburbs, so it wasn't particularly unsafe. As we were walking on our usual path, I spotted a small animal carcass, which is not uncommon. However, this one looked weird, color pattern did not match typical wildlife, and after further investigation, I discovered that it was a house cat. To our horror though, we discovered that it had been decapitated. And we found the perfectly intact head a mere 15 feet away. With its collar still in tow. The entire thing started to get worse when we started figuring out the whole situation. The cat had been perfectly and cleanly decapitated, and there had been no missing animal signs, so as we soon realized, the owner must have killed their cat. What became even more apparent to us, was there was at least 10 houses within direct line of sight. We got worried that someone would spot us discovering what they did, so we ran. Story 2, not long after the first story. Me and my friend were exploring some more forest again. In a completely different area, this particular section was beautiful, with large rocks and a lake overlook. The wildlife was booming and the plants were lush. As we got further in, we got to an area that was equally as beautiful with a ton of quartz crystals. The sun was going down, so we decided to turn back. We suddenly started to realize that there was a lot of noise around us. Frogs, cicadas, crickets, the fireflies were coming out, a light breeze had come through. However, all of a sudden the air went stagnant, and everything fell dead silent. Me and my friend immediately looked at each other. I can't speak for him, but I immediately started to have vertigo. We suddenly did not feel welcome in the forest, so we left in a hurry. The creepiest part for me, was in the news the very next day. We saw a post from the local government. They just zoned over 5 square miles of that forest to be demolished to make room for housing. I went back recently, years later. The forest has had over a third of it complete flattened to make room for shitty housing. I had never felt so depressed about something like that before. I don't know how, but I feel like the forest had somehow knew what was going to happen. Thinking back to it, it was almost like someone learning they were terminal and only had a few years to live. To this day, they are still zoning more and more of that forest. It will eventually be completely destroyed. When I was a 10 to 12-year-old boy, I went to a sports day with hundreds of kids from the local schools. As I'm sitting on top of a soccer goal with 5 of my friends or so, someone who I thought to be a teacher from another school starts shouting at us for sitting on the goal. The man was around 35, obese, and had a very high-pitched voice. For some reason, I'm the only one of my friends to get punished for this. He comes over, grabs me by the neck and starts dragging me towards a small building. He repeatedly tells me that my punishment was to stay and clean up the place after everyone had left. I shouldn't go home with my friends when the day was over, I had to stay with him. Looking back, This was especially weird because my class was going home by a bus 30 kilometers. I was really scared and sad, but as a kid, I always just did what the teachers told me to. So I'm placed inside a little shed in which sports equipment is kept. After sitting for maybe half an hour, my best friend who I've known since birth comes and rescues me, telling me that they're going home and that I have to come too. I'm scared of breaking rules, but I decide to go with him. To this day, I don't know what could have happened if my friend didn't come and save me. When I was about 7 or 8, my older brother came to visit from England. We, him, my other brother and myself, decided to hang out in the basement and watch movies. It starts getting late and my brothers, being the gems that they are, take the only 2 bedrooms in the basement and leave me to sleep on the couch in the main area. I am deathly afraid of the dark, to the point where if I'm home alone, I sleep with at least 3 lights on, RIP my light bill, so I build a little pillow fort for myself to protect me, and I decided to sleep with a walnut cracker just in case. This was around the time where those Let's Pretend Elmo dolls were really popular, and my younger sister had one. You put Elmo into different positions and he'd pretend to be different things. I had finally started to drift off to sleep when I heard Elmo loves to pretend. Wanna play? I can't even put into words the extreme panic I felt. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. It didn't help that I'd watched the Child's Play movies with my cousins a few weeks before. In order for the Elmo doll to turn on, you had to squeeze his hand, and as I said before, both of my brothers were in their rooms and I was alone on the couch. The Elmo doll was on the far side of the room, by itself. As I continued to lay there freaking out, I heard my older brother open his room door and ask what was that. I sort of sit up and tell him I think it was the doll. He pauses. Our basement had really small windows at the top, so I could see his outline from the window in his room, and we both silently decide that we didn't quite feel like living out a horror movie that night, so we both went into my other brother's room and slept on the floor. I don't remember sleeping very much that night. My nose was running like crazy, but I refused to leave and get a tissue because I was certain Elmo was going to fuck me up. Now that I'm older, I chalk it up to the thing malfunctioning, but the sheer terror I experienced the night. Oof. I didn't realize how creepy it was when it was happening, but right at the end I got suspicious. Then someone informed me just WTF was going on. I play pool at a small pub in rural England. I went in one night and it was pretty dead, nobody to play with, so I just hung out at the bar. Eventually these students come in and start playing pool, so I asked them if I could play the winner. Guy I was talking to at the bar apparently knew them, so he came over too and started talking to them as well. I found out they go to an art school nearby and were all between 17 to 18 years old, drinking age is 18 here, and they're still allowed in the bar at 16, so this wasn't unusual. Anyway, so I'm playing pool with them and bar guy was giving a hard time to one of the girls there. Would have seemed out of place. We're both in our early 30s, but he knew them, so I let it go. Fast forward a little bit more of the same of all this, and the bar guy was about to go get a refill. He asked the same girl, "You really don't drink?" And when she said no, he said to me, "I've been trying to buy her a drink all night and she keeps saying no." At this point, I was thinking that even if he knew her, that was a creepy thing to say, but maybe I'd be overstepping by saying something, because at this point I wasn't entirely confident at parsing British sarcasm, so I figured I would make a joke about it. I laughed a little and said, "That's a very suspicious sentence to an American." The girl immediately said thank you, and walked over to her other friends. Bar guy shrugged and went to get his beer refilled. As soon as he was out of earshot, I asked how she knows him and she said, "I don't know him, I thought he was with you." Fuck, I met that guy like 2 minutes before they showed up. I was actually planning on leaving, but I texted my girlfriend that I was gonna stay until one of them left and hung out for a while. One of the students comes in the pub all the time, and he updated me that that was the end of the interesting part of the story for them, which is good. A few weeks later, bar guy was in the pub again and someone pointed him out to me and said, "Watch that guy around young women." I was like, WTF, what did he do in front of you? He said nothing, but he's on the sex offender registry and did 4 years in prison for grooming a 13-year-old girl. Fuck. Anyway, all of that was like 8 months ago, and when that guy comes around, I can see it on his face that he knows everyone knows now, because we pointed it out to so many people. As a social circle, that includes the owner of the bar, we have no idea what to do because we don't like having him around. But if we boot him, he'll move on to another bar and there will be a period of time where everyone at the new bar doesn't know to keep an eye on him and he might be successful. We did get a set of cameras running there, so if he gives us anything resembling actionable evidence, the recording will go straight to the police. My brother and I lived in Pennsylvania for about a year. We loved attending haunted hayrides when we lived in New York and wanted to do it in PA. Well, the closest one to us was in Maryland and it was about an hour's drive. I was 22 and he was 17. So, we make a day out of it and go and stop for dinner and just drive around. So, finally it's about 7 p.m. and we GPS the location and find ourselves driving down a super long desolate road. It was so hilly that it seemed like we were driving off a cliff several times. We are both starting to feel super spooked, especially me as a newish driver in an unknown area, and it's dark, but we both agree it's because we are preparing for the hayride that we found online BTW. We finally see the sign and pull into a rocky dirt parking lot and are greeted by a guy in full freaky costume. He doesn't say anything but just points ahead. I asked him a question and he wouldn't answer. So, I'm like, haha, he is in character, just trying to dampen my fear. I drive into the parking lot and immediately notice how empty it is. We were the only ones. There weren't even workers' cars, and like I said, this was in the middle of nowhere. Plus we got there an hour after it opened and it was a Saturday. I hear chainsaws in the distance and a massive cornfield and call my grandmother, who told me to go with my gut and book it out of there. I drove out of there so fast. It was terrifying. This happened a month ago, really creepy. My birthday was in a few days, and so some of my relatives who live in another state came down to mine for a party. I have a young cousin named Ava who's turning 4 this year, and after the cake and the presents we went to my driveway to play with my dog. My driveway curves down from the house since it sits on a little hill. The rest of the family was on the porch, and the vehicles were preventing them from seeing us, but they trusted my irresponsible ass to keep my cousin and my dog safe. A few minutes of throwing the stick to my dog and Ava running around with her, I saw a white car speed past our house, going right. I don't think anything of it yet, since cars usually pass our house a lot. But it comes back not even a minute later and slows to a stop next to the entrance of the driveway, about a yard or less away from where me and Ava were. I got suspicious, so I told her to go up to the porch and bring my dog with her. As I'm keeping my eye on the car and walking up, it slowly drives off. I tell my parents about it and we stay inside the rest of the day. I shrugged it off but kept thinking that it was really weird and creepy. Fast forward a day and my family left already and are gone from my house. I'm drawing on my computer with my drawing tablet and listening to music when I glance up and see the white car parked some feet away from my window and I freak out. Right when I notice it, the car speeds off and I shut my blinds. A few minutes later I get anxious and go tell my parents about it. I haven't seen it again, but I'm still on edge because it freaked me out a lot. Maybe it was my imagination or what, but so many things happen at my neighborhood, and mostly at my house, it creeps me out.